message that didn't belong to me arrived at 9:41 p.m., right when I was folding the last sweater. I remember the time because I had just glanced at the clock above the stove, the one that runs a minute fast. The way Harold always said was helpful if you like pretending you're early. The house was quiet, except for the dryer humming in the laundry room and the soft clink of hangers. As I slid clothes into place, my phone buzzed on the counter. I almost ignored it. I wasn't expecting anyone to text me that late, and if I was honest, I was tired in the deep, settled way that comes from weeks of planning. But I wiped my hands on a dish towel and picked it up anyway. It was from my son, Matthew. "Mom, just so you're not confused later, the trip is set, but you won't be joining us. It's simpler this way. You've already helped enough." I read it once, then again slower. I waited for the second message, the one that explained the joke, or softened the words, or apologized for the phrasing. It didn't come. I stood there with the phone in my hand, while the dryer clicked off in the other room, the silence settling heavier than before. On the counter beside me sat a stack of labeled envelopes. Evan, Lily, Caleb, each holding spending money for my grandchildren. I'd written their names in blue marker, looping the letters carefully, the way I always did. I turned the phone face down. For a long moment, I just stood there, staring at the wall as if it might tell me I'd misunderstood. This was the family trip I had been planning for nearly 3 years. Not a casual getaway, not a last-minute idea. This was the one thing I'd promised myself after Harold passed, that I would bring the family together somewhere warm, somewhere bright, somewhere that felt like a beginning instead of an ending. Not for me, really, for all of us. We were supposed to be going to Santa Isla, a quiet coastal town I'd visited once decades ago. Nothing flashy, no crowds, just ocean air, tiled roofs, and mornings that smelled like coffee and salt. I had chosen the rental house myself. 2 stories, wide porch, enough bedrooms, so no one felt squeezed. I'd checked the steps twice to make sure they weren't too steep for Matthew's father-in-law. I'd called ahead about food allergies, about airport transfers, about whether the kids could borrow beach umbrellas. I had even packed early, something I never used to do, because I liked seeing the suitcase by the door. It made the trip feel real. Now, apparently, it wasn't. Another buzz. "Don't take this the wrong way," Matthew added. "It's not personal." That was when I sat down. I pulled out the kitchen chair and lowered myself into it, the way you do when your legs suddenly don't trust you. I stared at the grain in the table, tracing a small scratch Harold had made years ago while fixing a loose hinge. Not personal. I had paid for the house, the flights, the shuttle, the excursions. Every deposit had come from the same account, mine, because it was easier, because I trusted them, because no one had suggested otherwise. And somehow, I was no longer part of it. I thought of the small canvas bag hanging on the back of the chair. Inside, it were gifts I'd wrapped for the kids, seashell bracelets, postcards already stamped, a tiny journal for Lily because she liked to write her thoughts. I'd imagined giving them out on the first night, everyone sitting on the porch while the sun went down. I imagined Matthew laughing the way he used to, leaning against the railing, telling me I'd overpacked again. That version of him felt very far away. I didn't reply to the message. I didn't call. I simply sat there until the house felt too quiet, then stood up and turned off the kitchen light. As I passed the suitcase by the door, I paused just for a second and rested my hand on the handle. For the first time since Harold died, a thought crossed my mind that made my chest tighten. Maybe this trip was never meant to include me. And that was when something inside me, not anger, not grief, but something steadier, began to shift. The space I didn't notice disappearing. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was crying. I wasn't. But because my mind kept replaying moments I had filed away as nothing. Small things, easy things to excuse, the kind of details you don't question until they line up neatly, one after another, like dots asking to be connected. Morning came gray and quiet. I made coffee out of habit, not desire, and carried the mug to the living room where sunlight usually pooled across the rug. That day it stopped short of the couch, leaving the room feeling unfinished. I sat down anyway and stared at the framed photos on the bookshelf. There were plenty of pictures of Matthew. Matthew at graduation. Matthew on his wedding day. Matthew holding his first child, his face split open with joy. I smiled at those without thinking. Then I noticed something else. I wasn't in most of them. Not missing entirely, just cropped, or positioned behind someone else, or replaced slowly over time. I remembered when it started, though I hadn't known it then. It was Thanksgiving, years ago. I had arrived early with 2 pies and a bag of rolls, my coat still on when Matthew's wife, Claire, waved me toward the kitchen. "We're doing photos before dinner," she said brightly. "Just the kids first." That made sense. Then it was just immediate family. Then it was "we're losing the light." I laughed it off that year, telling myself I didn't care about pictures. But later, when they posted them online, I noticed the caption, "So grateful for our little family." Little, as if I weren't part of it. The pattern grew slowly, like a tide that rises without announcing itself. Birthday plans happened without me until the invitations were an afterthought. Holidays moved to Claire's parents' house, always framed as convenience. I was still welcome, always welcome, but never essential. Once at a school event, a teacher asked Claire if she wanted a photo with the grandparents. Claire turned and gestured only to her parents. I stood there holding my purse, smiling politely, waiting to be introduced. She didn't notice. Matthew didn't either. I sipped my coffee and felt something cold settle behind my ribs. Not resentment, recognition. I had been shrinking without realizing it. Around noon, I opened my laptop. I told myself I was just checking emails. but my hands knew where they were going before I admitted it. I clicked into the folder labeled Santa Isla Trip. Confirmations, receipts, schedules, all carefully organized. There it was, the final itinerary. I scrolled slowly, scanning names. Claire, Matthew, the kids, Claire's parents, Claire's sister and her partner. 8 names. I counted again. I wasn't there. No alternate booking. No separate room. No to be confirmed. Just 8. My chest tightened, but my hands stayed steady as I closed the laptop. I didn't cry. I didn't gasp. I simply sat there, staring at the dark screen, feeling something harden into place. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a decision. Later that afternoon, Claire called. Her voice was light, cheerful, carefully casual, the tone people use when they want something to feel normal. "Hey, just wanted to check in," she said. "Everything's good on your end, right? Payment-wise." There it was. Not "how are you?" Not "did you get Matthew's message?" Just logistics. "Yes," I said evenly. "Everything's fine." "Great. We're packing now. It's chaos here," she laughed. "You know how kids are." I waited. There was a pause, brief but telling. "Well," she continued, "we'll send pictures. You'll love it there. You'll love it there." As if I'd be watching from somewhere else. As if this was always the arrangement. After we hung up, I stood at the window and watched a sparrow hop along the fence. I thought of all the ways I had justified my role over the years. They're busy. They have their own lives. I don't want to be a burden. The word burden echoed unpleasantly. That evening, I walked into my study and opened the small metal lockbox I kept in the bottom drawer. Inside were documents I rarely looked at anymore: insurance papers, old warranties, and one folder marked travel fund. I flipped it open. Account holder, Eleanor Price. Authorized users, none. I sat back in my chair, heart steady, thoughts clear. For years, I had believed generosity meant stepping aside, paying quietly, asking little, being grateful for whatever space remained. But looking at those papers, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to see before. They hadn't pushed me out. They had assumed I would move on my own. And the strangest part was this: the realization didn't hurt the way the message had. It felt clarifying, like finally understanding the rules of a game I hadn't known I was playing. I closed the folder and turned off the light in the study. That night, for the first time since the text arrived, I slept, and while I didn't know exactly what I would do yet, one thing had become certain. I was done pretending not to notice. The quiet power of being the one who decides the morning I made the decision didn't feel dramatic. There was no thunder, no racing heart, no sudden burst of courage. I woke up at my usual time, fed the cat, and stood at the sink watching the kettle heat. Outside, the street was damp from overnight rain, the kind that leaves everything smelling clean and temporary. It was the day before their departure. I knew that because the reminder sat calmly on my calendar. Final payment processes today. I carried my tea into the dining room and sat where the light fell just right across the table. For years, I'd planned this trip with lists taped to the fridge, reminders scribbled in notebooks, notes folded into drawers. Now there was nothing left to do except decide. I opened my laptop and logged into the bank account I rarely thought about anymore because it had become automatic. Bills, deposits, payments flowing in and out like a tide I no longer watched. There it was. Travel account balance, $18,942.67, 3 years of saving. Skipped lunches, canceled subscriptions, even a part-time evening job tutoring online when my eyes ached and my patience wore thin. Every dollar had gone toward this trip because I believed it would bring us back together. I clicked through the transaction list. Villa deposit, flights, transportation, excursions, all linked, all connected to me. I hovered over the mouse, not because I was afraid, but because I wanted to be sure. Not just legally, emotionally. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't punishment. It was alignment. I thought about Matthew's message again. You've already helped enough. The way the word enough sat there, heavy and final, like a door closing. I whispered to the empty room, no, I haven't helped. I've funded. There's a difference. A small confirmation window popped up when I selected pause account activity. Are you sure you want to suspend all linked payments? Yes. Another notice followed. All associated cards and automated transactions will be temporarily disabled. I clicked confirm. That was it. No alarms, no warnings, no drama. The screen simply refreshed. I closed the laptop and sat very still, waiting for regret. It didn't come. Instead, a strange calm settled over me, the kind that comes after you stop negotiating with yourself. The phone stayed silent all morning. Around noon, I unpacked the suitcase that had been sitting by the door. I folded the clothes carefully and returned them to their drawers, pausing when I reached the sundress I'd bought just for the trip. It still had the tag on it. I hung it in the back of the closet. Then I gathered the children's gifts from the canvas bag. One by one, I unwrapped them and placed them back into their boxes. When I reached the postcards already written, I hesitated. I slid them into a drawer instead. That afternoon, I took a walk through the neighborhood. People were mowing lawns, loading groceries, living ordinary lives untouched by the small but significant shift happening inside me. A neighbor waved and asked if I was all set for vacation. I smiled politely. Not yet, I said, but soon. By early evening, the first message came. Mom, quick question. The travel app is showing an error on the rental car. Did you change anything? I didn't answer. 5 minutes later, it might just be a glitch. Can you check when you have a second? I placed the phone face down on the counter and made dinner. While the pasta boiled, the phone buzzed again. This time it rang. I let it ring. By the time I finished eating, there were 3 missed calls and a voicemail notification. I didn't listen. Instead, I made myself a second cup of tea and sat at the table where I'd once spread out maps and schedules. The space felt lighter now, less crowded by expectation. Later that night, I opened my email. There it was. Booking update. Santa Isla Villa reservation. Cancelled. The message was brief and professional, confirming that the reservation had been released and the charges reversed due to account suspension. As the sole account holder, no further action was required. I read it twice. Then I closed my laptop. Silence finally spoke for me. The calls didn't stop overnight. They multiplied. My phone vibrated against the nightstand so often that I finally turned it face down, then slid it into the drawer beneath my socks. Even then, I could feel it buzzing through the wood like a trapped insect. Each vibration carried urgency, confusion, and something else I recognized, but refused to name just yet. I lay awake, listening to the house breathe around me. The tick of the hallway clock, the soft whistle of wind through the window frame herald, never quite managed to seal. My chest felt tight, not with fear, but with a pressure I hadn't felt in years, the weight of holding my ground. Morning came pale and slow. I made breakfast, but barely tasted it. Toast went cold on the plate while I stared out the window, watching a delivery truck idle at the corner. Somewhere, at that very moment, my family was probably standing at a counter, smiling too hard, insisting something must be wrong. They were right. Something was wrong. It just wasn't the bank. I took the phone out of the drawer. 16 missed calls, 9 voicemails, more texts than I counted. I opened the first voicemail. "Mom, it's me. Call me back. Please, no apology, no acknowledgement, just expectation." The next one came 10 minutes later, his voice tighter. "They're saying the card was declined. I don't understand. You didn't change anything, did you?" Another. "Claire's parents are getting upset. The kids are tired. Just call me." Each message peeled back another layer of the truth. Not once did he ask if I was okay. Not once did he say my name the way he used to when he was small and needed comfort. I listened until my hands began to shake, then stopped. The phone rang again almost immediately. I answered it this time. "Mom," Matthew said, relief rushing out of him like air from a punctured tire. "Okay, good. We're at the airport, and I know," I said quietly. There was a pause. "You know?" "Yes." Another pause, longer now. I could hear voices in the background, the scrape of luggage wheels, an announcement echoing through the terminal. "Did you freeze the account?" he asked. I closed my eyes. I had imagined this moment, imagined anger, accusations, tears. Instead, what I felt was a deep, aching sadness, not for myself, but for the boy I used to know, the one who once held my hand too tightly crossing the street. "Yes," I said. "What? Why would you do that?" His voice rose, sharp with disbelief. "Mom, This is crazy. Everyone's here. We're supposed to board in an hour. I swallowed. And I wasn't supposed to be there at all, I said. Silence. Then a sigh, heavy and impatient. That's not what this is about. We can talk about that later. Right now, we just need you to unlock it. Later. The word landed like an insult. I won't, I said. What do you mean you won't? His voice cracked now, edged with frustration. You can't just do this. You put us in a terrible position. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because the irony was so complete it hurt. I didn't put you anywhere, I said. I stepped out of something I was never invited into. That's not fair, he snapped. You're punishing the kids. No, I replied, my voice steady, even as my heart pounded. I'm stopping myself from being erased. Claire's voice cut in somewhere behind him, sharp and urgent. I couldn't make out the words, but I recognized the tone. Control slipping. Narrative cracking. Mom, Matthew said again, lower now. Can we please just fix this? We'll talk when we get back. We'll figure it out. I thought of all the times I had waited for conversations that never came. All the moments I swallowed hurt because it seemed easier than being difficult. All the ways I had made myself smaller to keep the peace. No, I said softly. We won't. He went quiet. You're choosing this? He asked. I looked around my kitchen, the same kitchen where I had packed gifts, labeled envelopes, imagined laughter that would never happen. Yes, I said. I am. I ended the call. The phone rang again immediately. I turned it off. For the first time since Harold died, since Matthew grew distant, since I began disappearing from my own family story, I cried, not loud, not dramatically, but with my face buried in my hands, shoulders shaking. Grief finally given permission to exist. When the tears passed, something else remained. Relief. That afternoon, emails rolled in one by one. Cancellation confirmations. Refund notices. Polite, neutral messages that treated me with more acknowledgement than my own family had in months. The money returned slowly, deliberately, like it was finding its way back home. As the sun dipped lower, I stepped outside onto the porch. The air was warm. A neighbor waved. Somewhere down the street, children laughed. Life went on, and for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was part of it again. Not as a background figure, not as a resource, but as a person who mattered enough to be heard. Even if the silence had to do the talking for me, the phone rang again. This time, it was Matthew. I watched the screen light up, his name flashing like a request, not a question. I didn't answer. Because for the first time in a very long while, I wasn't waiting to be chosen. I had already chosen myself. And somewhere beyond the ringing phone and the canceled plans, a different future was beginning to take shape. One that didn't require me to disappear in order to belong. What I chose to carry forward, the house felt different once the phone stopped ringing. Not quieter. It had always been quiet, but calmer, like something restless had finally left. I moved through the rooms slowly that morning, touching familiar surfaces as if I were seeing them for the first time. The back of the chair Harold used to sit in, the corner of the counter where Matthew once spilled juice and cried like it was the end of the world. I let myself feel it all. The sadness came first, heavy and undeniable. It sat in my chest like a stone, pressing down with the weight of everything I had hoped would be different. I mourned the version of my family I had carried for years, the one where love was returned with care instead of expectation. Then came the anger. Not sharp, not explosive, but hot and steady. It surprised me how long it had been waiting. Every dismissed comment, every forgotten invitation, every time I told myself I was being sensitive instead of listening to the ache telling me something was wrong. I stood in the doorway of the spare room, the one I'd planned to give the kids, and felt my throat tighten. I mattered, I said out loud. The words sounded strange in the empty room, but they didn't feel wrong. By mid-morning, the last refund notification arrived. The balance in the account was whole again, the number glowing calmly on the screen as if nothing had happened. For years, that money had been tied to a single dream, one that no longer existed. I closed the laptop and reached for my notebook. It was an old one, the kind with soft covers and pages that had yellowed at the edges. I'd used it over the years to jot down grocery lists, reminders, half-finished thoughts. I flipped past those and opened to a blank page. At the top, I wrote a single word. Why? Why had I saved so hard? Why had I given so freely? Why had I been willing to disappear to keep the peace? The answer came slowly, but clearly. Because I believed love meant sacrifice. Because I thought if I gave enough, I would be kept. Because I was afraid of being alone. That last one made my hands tremble. I had been so focused on holding my family together that I hadn't noticed how lonely I already was. That afternoon, I went through my address book. Names jumped out at me. Women I saw every week. Women I hugged. Women who smiled and nodded and never complained. Women who carried their own quiet griefs with grace. Martha, who lost her husband and still set 2 cups on the counter every morning. Joan, whose children lived across the country and sent postcards instead of visits. Ruth, who once said, half joking, that no one ever took pictures of her anymore. I remembered conversations whispered over coffee, shared looks during church announcements, laughter that covered loneliness, so practiced it went unnoticed. Without thinking too hard about it, I began to write their names down. Not a list of obligation, a list of possibility. That night, I dreamed of the ocean, not Santa Isla, not any real place, just water stretching wide and endless, the sound steady and reassuring. When I woke, my chest felt lighter than it had in months. The next morning, I made calls, not to explain, not to defend, not to reopen wounds. I called Martha first. Would you ever consider taking a trip? I asked. There was a pause, then a soft laugh filled with disbelief. With who? With me, I said, and a few others who might need it. Another pause, longer this time. I'd like that, she said quietly. I'd really like that. Each call that followed felt easier. Voices warmed. Hesitations turned into careful excitement. Some cried. One said she didn't know if she remembered how to want something for herself. I understood that feeling too well. When the calls were done, I sat back and felt something unfamiliar bloom inside me. Anticipation. Not the anxious kind that waits for approval, but the steady kind that comes from choosing with intention. That evening, Matthew texted again. We should talk. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I typed back. Not yet. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel cruel. I felt complete because for the first time, I wasn't planning my life around the fear of being left behind. I was planning it around the quiet certainty that I deserved to be present, fully, unapologetically, and on my own terms, and whatever came next, I would meet it standing. The journey that finally included me the morning we left, I woke before my alarm. Not because I was anxious, but because I was eager in a way that felt unfamiliar and gentle, like excitement without fear hiding underneath it. Sunlight crept through the curtains, pale and patient, and for once my first thought wasn't about whether everyone else was ready. It was about whether I was. The suitcase by the door was lighter than the one I had packed before. Fewer outfits, no emergency extras. No gifts meant to earn smiles. Just clothes I liked, a book I'd been saving, and a scarf Harold once bought me because he said the color made me look brave. When Martha knocked, I opened the door to find her standing there with a hat that was far too large and a smile she kept trying to restrain. Behind her, Joan adjusted her bag nervously, and Ruth lingered near the car, eyes wide like she couldn't quite believe she'd followed through. We hugged real hugs, the kind that linger. I felt the warmth of their bodies, the quiet gratitude pulsing through each embrace. No one rushed. No one checked a schedule. On the drive to the airport, conversation flowed easily. Stories spilled out between laughter and long pauses. Stories no one had asked them to tell in years. I listened, really listened, and felt something stitch itself back together inside me with every mile we traveled. At the terminal, no one treated us like an inconvenience. The clerk smiled and called us by name. The agent asked if we were celebrating something. Ruth answered softly, yes, though she didn't explain what. I understood. We were celebrating visibility. As the plane lifted off, Martha reached for my hand. Her grip was warm and certain, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like the oldest person in the room. I felt like part of something living and present. When we arrived, the air smelled like citrus and sea salt. The small inn overlooked the water, its windows thrown open to let the breeze wander wherever it pleased. There were no matching shirts, no rigid plans, just time. That first evening, we sat on the terrace, watching the sky fade from gold to deep blue. Joan cried quietly while talking about her late sister. Ruth laughed until she startled herself. Martha leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes like she was memorizing the moment. I felt full, not because everything was perfect, but because nothing was being taken from me. On the third day, my phone buzzed. Matthew's name appeared on the screen. My heart tightened, but it didn't ache the way it used to. I read the message once. I didn't understand what I was doing. I'm sorry. I hope someday we can talk. I stared at the water for a long time before responding. Someday, I typed. When we're both ready to see each other clearly. I set the phone down and didn't look back. That night, as waves rolled steadily against the shore, I thought about all the years I had confused endurance with love, how often I had stayed quiet to remain included, only to vanish anyway. I knew better now. Love does not require erasure. Family does not mean shrinking. Generosity without respect is not kindness. It is surrender. In the dark, under a sky scattered with stars, I felt Harold's presence, not as loss, but as reassurance. As if he were proud that I had finally stepped fully into my own life. When we returned home days later, I unpacked slowly, deliberately. I placed the scarf back in my drawer. I set the photos we took on the bookshelf, right where I could see them. I didn't know what the future held with my son, but I knew what it held with myself. And that, at last, was enough.
Thanks for watching all the way to the end. I'd love to hear your thoughts, drop a comment, and let me know what you think. If you enjoyed this story, hit that like button and subscribe to join the community. There's plenty more stories like this coming your way. What surprised you most about this video? Share it in the comments below.